One day after his latest arraignment, Donald Trump is making quite clear that he is counting on the Supreme Court to protect him from his multiple criminal indictments. Trump called on the justices to, quote, intercede in the 2024 presidential race because of what he is calling election interference. Trump argues that the 78 criminal charges filed against him by multiple prosecutors in separate jurisdictions, that those are all somehow part of a singular deep state plot, a theory that may be rooted in panic or political strategy or both. Joining me now is someone who is very familiar with Trump's defense and delay tactics, former Manhattan DA Cy Vance. He spent years investigating Trump and his family, along, of course, with his successor, Alvin Bragg, who, as we know, issued Trump's first federal criminal indictment back in April. Mr. Vance, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Good evening. First, your thoughts on this notion. Trump is calling this election interference and suggesting the Supreme Court needs to intervene. Do you think it's going to get to that point?
I think ultimately, of course, Trump will take whatever convictions may occur against him to the Supreme Court on appeal. We litigated twice against Trump in the Supreme Court. Ultimately, were successful in the Supreme Court, concluding that the president had to abide to the laws like everybody else and had to turn over his tax returns, which formed the basis for our indictment of his business and his chief financial officer. But the Supreme Court was differently constituted, even as recently as 2 or 3 years ago. The Supreme Court today, I think, is much more likely to be favorable to some of the arguments in some of the cases that Trump may take up to the Supreme Court. In the Manhattan case, for example, I think there are going to be somewhat novel issues of law as to whether a federal law can be used to bump up a state misdemeanor to a felony. That's something that could see the Supreme Court deciding against the prosecutor. I think in the other cases, the conduct is so much clearly aligned with the charges, particularly in the most recent indictment, that I think even with this Supreme Court, Donald Trump is not necessarily going to find a safe haven.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, I think a lot of folks looked at that Alvin Bragg indictment and thought there might be some concerns here. But given the court's record just on other rulings vis-a-vis the House's investigation into January 6th, it almost seems like, yeah, John Roberts is not necessarily on Trump, or at least the conservative justices are not necessarily on Trump's side on a lot of privilege concerns that are sure to come back up in the federal indictment regarding his actions in and around January 6th.
Well, in our case, really, when you look at it, the court was 9-0 against Trump's claim of privilege. There were subtleties which divided the opinions, but on the issue of whether or not he was essentially immune from investigation for his conduct as a private citizen, even while he was president, the Supreme Court was clear and unanimous. We do have a different Supreme Court. I think that is, that needs to be calibrated into the thinking of all the litigants. But I do think, listening to your prior panelists, we are in dangerous times. This is a time where judges particularly are going to be faced with how to manage a defendant who is a former president who will push them to the edge. Ultimately, I think the control of Donald Trump in the next 18 months is going to lie in the hands of the courts. They're going to be reluctant to jail him for violating court orders for fear that will perhaps cause riots, as they might some other litigant. But they're going to have to find a way to respect the authority of the court and the process, which is critical to what happens in the next 18 months, and hopefully without exploding this already volatile situation into something that is unmanageable.
Yeah, I think that that's such a wise assessment that it's really going to be in great part in the hands of the court. I wonder, given the judge's cautions to the Trump during his arraignment, do you think he's already violated some of the terms of his bail? Yesterday, or I guess it was today, he posted, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." He's on the stump right now, or just finished being on the stump in Alabama, calling prosecutors, deranged and all other manner of names. I mean, does this count as a violation of the terms of his bail agreement?
Well, I'm sure that the court and their court law clerks are sitting around tonight asking that very same question. And in some sense, the courts are going to give him leeway because they are going to respect his First Amendment rights as far as they go. But I think that, quite honestly, there were things that Trump said with regard to Alvin Bragg that I thought would be a trigger for the court to impose severe sanctions. How severe is really up to the court. But I think he's crossed the line. The question is, the courts are dealing with a very volatile situation. They have to balance their authority and control of their courtroom with a unprecedentedly, extremely volatile situation, which requires them to be not just judges, but readers of the community and the community reaction.
Yeah, it's a very difficult position to be in, to say the least. Mr. Vance, given your former position as a former DA, I wonder what you think about the order of operations here. We're awaiting a potential indictment from Fulton County DA Fani Willis. There are, as you are well aware, several indictments floating around here. What should be the order of operations, and what do you expect in terms of whether the federal case goes before any of the state cases?
Well, I, early on in my investigation of the Trump Organization, deferred to the federal prosecutor for literally a year. I think it was mistaken for me to do that because ultimately the Justice Department walked away from its investigation. But I thought it was the right move at the time. Alvin Bragg, as I apparently has indicated that he would agree to Jack Smith's case going first. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think prosecutors need to work with each other, as courts need to work with each other, particularly when we have overlapping multiple judicial schedules that need to be managed. I think Ms. Willis, my expectation is because her case was indicted last, if it is indicted, then it will go last. But really, I think the question is going to be, is DA Bragg going to give Prosecutor Smith the opportunity to proceed forward? Will he be okay with that? My sense is he will, because I think my sense is DA Bragg recognizes, although he has great confidence in his case, that the federal case really is the most important case in the country right now that needs to be managed with as little outside distraction as can be achieved.
Yeah, I mean, I would go so far as to say one of the most important cases of my lifetime. Former Manhattan DA Cy Vance, I'm so deeply appreciative of your time and thoughts tonight, sir. Thanks for spending some time with me on this Friday night.
Thank you, Alex. Great to be here.